9 expert hikers vanished into the frozen heart of Russia. When their bodies were found, some were barefoot, 1 had no tongue, and 2 were radioactive. The Soviet Union said it was an accident, so why did they open a criminal case before anyone knew they were missing? In the frozen wilderness of Russia's Ural Mountains, on a February night in 1959, an event unfolded that would become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. 9 young hikers, all part of an elite Soviet mountaineering group, were discovered dead under baffling circumstances. Their tent had been ripped open from the inside out. Their bodies were scattered across the snowy terrain, some with brutal internal injuries, but no visible external wounds. 1 hiker was found without eyes. Another was missing her tongue. Even more disturbing, some of their clothing bore traces of radiation. In a place where nothing of the sort should exist, these facts would forever challenge logic and science. Though the Soviet government attempted to control the narrative for decades, the truth of what happened on that mountain remains elusive. Was it a botched military operation, an act of violence, or something even more disturbing? Over 60 years later, new evidence has surfaced, but instead of providing clarity, it has only deepened the mystery. What really happened at Dyatlov Pass? To understand the tragedy, we have to look at the context. This was the Cold War era, a time of ideological division and intense nationalism. In the Soviet Union, youth culture was shaped by a blend of discipline, political idealism, and adventure. Activities like skiing, hiking, and mountaineering were encouraged as patriotic exercises designed to build the ideal Soviet citizen. State-supported sports tourism surged in popularity, with young people packing trains to head for remote, snow-covered peaks. These expeditions were seen as more than recreation. They were almost civic duty. It was in this climate that 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov organized a challenging expedition into the Urals. Already respected in sports and mountaineering circles, Dyatlov had extensive experience, technical knowledge, and a strong leadership record. He assembled a team of 9 university students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, each physically fit, intellectually capable, and seasoned in extreme winter trekking. Several had military experience or technical training, and some had already traversed the Ural Mountains. This was no group of amateurs. Their goal was ambitious: ski over 300 kilometers through the harshest terrain in northern Russia, summit Mount Otorten, and return on schedule. Achieving this would earn them the coveted Grade 3 certification, the highest official recognition for a sports expedition in the USSR. The journey also had symbolic weight. It was meant to honor the 21st Congress of the Communist Party, reflecting Soviet strength and resolve during a tense moment in the Cold War. The expedition was formally approved by the Route Commission, an essential bureaucratic step in the Soviet system. Every detail was officially documented: the route, the equipment, the dates, and the participants. On January 23, 1959, the group departed Sverdlovsk by train, skis slung over their shoulders, carrying both survival gear and the revolutionary zeal of Soviet youth. They passed through the town of Ivdel and finally arrived in the village of Vizhay, the last inhabited settlement before the vast, frozen isolation of the northern Urals. On January 27th, the group began their trek, but by the next day, one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to health issues, specifically sciatica and knee pain. That decision would save his life. He would be the sole survivor of the group. The remaining 9 pressed on into the deep snow and sub-zero temperatures. On February 1st, with weather conditions deteriorating rapidly, they chose to set up camp on an open slope of Kholat Syakhl, which translates from the indigenous Mansi language as Mountain of the Dead. Why they stopped there, instead of the more sheltered forest below, is unclear. It was a puzzling decision for such an experienced group. That night, or early the next morning, something happened. something so sudden and terrifying that it caused the hikers to slash their tent open from the inside and flee into the darkness, many of them barefoot, in a snowstorm. When no contact was made by the agreed date of February 12th, there was no immediate alarm. Delays were common. But by February 16th, concern grew among relatives and friends. The Ural Polytechnic Institute officially launched a search on February 20th. Military units, volunteer climbers, local Mansi hunters, and state rescue forces joined in. On February 26th, searchers located the group's tent. It was partially buried in snow and inexplicably slashed open from within. Its contents were intact. Outside, a chaotic trail of footprints led down the slope, some made by barefoot individuals, others in socks or one shoe. Following those tracks, rescuers discovered two bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonoshenko, lying near a makeshift campfire. Both were almost naked and bore signs of burns. Further uphill, 3 more bodies were found: Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their positions indicated they were trying to return to the tent. Initial autopsies pointed to hypothermia as the cause of death, with minor physical trauma likely caused by cold and disorientation. But the final 4 bodies, found 2 months later under 4 meters of snow, presented far more disturbing clues. They were Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Tibio-Brignoli. Their bodies were located in a ravine near a crude snow shelter built from branches. Some wore clothing that belonged to the others, indicating they had scavenged to survive. Dubinina had broken ribs, and her tongue was missing. Zolotaryov and Tibio-Brignoli suffered massive skull fractures. Kolevatov had no visible trauma, but his eyes were missing. Radiation levels on their clothing were abnormally high. How could such catastrophic internal injuries occur without external damage? And how did they survive long enough to build a shelter and change clothes? On February 28th, the Soviet government formed a special investigation committee. No public panic was declared, yet behind closed doors, even state officials seemed at a loss. The official report concluded that the hikers had died due to a compelling natural force. The case was closed, the files sealed, but the inconsistencies were too glaring to ignore. Theories began to multiply. One early theory involved escaped Gulag prisoners from a nearby labor camp, but investigators found no signs of robbery or struggle, and camp officials reported no escapees. A more persistent theory was that the group had stumbled upon secret military testing. Semyon Zolotaryov, age 34, much older than the others, had a military past, including service in World War II. Strange tattoos were found on his body after death. Years later, he was buried in a section of a cemetery used by KGB agents. Was that a coincidence? Perhaps not. Other circumstantial evidence added weight to the military theory. A military canteen with alcohol, a boot nail matching Soviet Army footwear, and a flashlight that stayed lit for weeks in the snow. Some reported helicopter tracks and disturbed snow patterns that suggested post-mortem interference. Researcher Yuri Kunzevich and others argued that the bodies had been moved and the scene manipulated, but some explanations veered into the paranormal. Locals and soldiers alike reported strange lights in the sky around the time of the tragedy, glowing spheres moving at impossible speeds. The indigenous Mansi claimed to have seen similar phenomena. Were they missiles, secret aircraft, or something else entirely? A photo taken by the group showed a shadowy figure in the forest. Zenaida Kolmogorova had written cryptically in her diary, "Now we know the Yeti exists." And yet the strangest detail of all may be this. Official Soviet documentation shows that the investigation was opened on February 6th, 2 full weeks before search operations officially began. How could a criminal case be launched before anyone knew the group was missing? Was it a bureaucratic mistake, or evidence that authorities already knew something had gone terribly wrong? Years passed. The Soviet Union collapsed, but interest in the Dyatlov Pass case reignited in the early 2000s, fueled by the internet and a wave of independent researchers. In 2015, the Russian government reopened the case. Experts revisited the site, simulated weather conditions, reviewed files, and ran digital models. In 2020, a new report was released. The group had been killed by a slab avalanche. According to the theory, the tent had been set on a 30-degree slope. Snow built up, and when the group cut into the base to pitch their tent, it triggered a compacted block of snow to collapse. The resulting force caused fatal injuries and forced the group into a panicked escape. This explanation was backed by simulations, published in Nature by Swiss researchers using snow physics models adapted from avalanche research. But many were unconvinced. Critics pointed out that the slope where the tent was found didn't match avalanche zones. There was no debris consistent with the slide. Why pitch camp in such a dangerous spot when shelter was nearby? Why slash the tent from inside? Why were some bodies mutilated and radioactive? Why did official timelines and witness reports contradict each other? Even today, despite new data, enhanced forensics, and government reassurances, the core of the Dyatlov Pass mystery remains unsolved. Something happened that night, something terrifying, fast, and inexplicable. And though many have tried to piece together the fragments, the full truth of what occurred on that snowy slope remains frozen in history. But what do you think really happened? Drop your theories in the comments. Military cover-up, alien encounter, or something no one's dared imagine.